All right, everybody, welcome back to section 16 of our cybercrime course. And this time we're going to be talking all about legal aspects of cybercrime investigations and digital forensics. So, really, it all starts with the Fourth Amendment, right? And the Fourth Amendment protects people uh, from unreasonable searches and seizures. Now, what does that mean? Well, there's a lot of kind of complicated legal precedent and a lot of court cases about what is reasonable versus unreasonable, what is a search or a seizure, and what isn't. But the best way to be really sure, if you are an investigator or law enforcement, government agent of any kind, the best way to ensure that you are abiding by the Fourth Amendment is to get a warrant, right? And a warrant is a determination of probable cause. And probable cause means, kind of a reasonable person would believe either a crime has committed or is being committed, and evidence will be found within the place that the police are wanting to search, right? But if an officer does a search in the field, it's the officer themselves who is determining whether probable cause actually exists or not. But when you apply for a warrant, you're letting a judge make the determination of whether probable cause exists or not. And that is seen as much safer and much more legally defensible. If it's not the officer determining whether there's probable cause, it's some neutral magistrate, i.e., a judge, right? So that warrant, a law enforcement officer or government agent of some kind can apply for a warrant, and they do a sworn affidavit, i.e., an application for a warrant, that very importantly has to list the location to be searched and the thing or things to be searched for and or seized, right? When it comes to digital evidence, that can have a few implications, which we'll discuss here in a minute. But the most important Supreme Court case regarding the Fourth Amendment, probably in all of American history, is Katz versus United States. Now, this is a very famous case that has absolutely nothing to do with cybercrime, but it is still important for us to know about before we move on. So, in Katz, the police recorded, audio taped Mr. Katz in a phone booth. And he had shut the door to the phone booth before making his phone call. And up until this case, the standard for the Fourth Amendment was as long as the police did not touch any person, a house, a paper, or an effect in order to do their search, in this case, an audio recording, then they didn't require a warrant. But Katz was upset. He believed his Fourth Amendment rights had been violated. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed with Katz. The Supreme Court said that an audio recording like that without a warrant was a violation of the Fourth Amendment because the Fourth Amendment protects people, not just their persons, their houses, their papers, and their effects, but it protects them from any kind of intrusion when they have a reasonable expectation of privacy. And that phrase right there has become kind of the controlling phrase when it comes to the legality of any kind of search. And that is any time that any person has a reasonable expectation of privacy, the police need a warrant or some kind of other exception to the warrant requirement, which we'll talk about again here in a moment. But that court case really kind of set the stage and set the standard for when searches are reasonable and not reasonable. But with our computerized data, do we have a reasonable expectation of privacy? Well, it depends on the circumstances. For my computer here in my home that I am recording this video on, I would absolutely have a reasonable expectation of privacy. But other issues arise for things like, if I am sharing my data with another company, like if I store my computerized data on a cloud server, do I still have Fourth Amendment protections? Now, so anytime we have that reasonable expectation of privacy, police need a warrant or some other way around the warrant requirement. And there are many of those, right? So the first one that we're going to talk about here is consent. By far, the vast majority of searches that law enforcement performs are done not with a warrant, but with consent, right? In other words, if the person who owns or controls that thing to be searched says, yeah, by all means, please come search this thing, I have no problem, I'm not objecting to this in any way, then police can search it, no warrant needed. Now, keep in mind that consent has to be voluntary. It can be revoked at any time. It can't be kind of, police can't manipulate the person in an immoral way. They can't threaten them, say, if you don't give me consent to search, I'm going to do this other bad thing to you. So consent has to be freely given, and it can be withdrawn at any time. Now, specifically when it comes to digital data, there's one court case here about consent that is fairly important, and that's U.S. v. Smith. And in U.S. v. Smith, there was a man who got caught with child pornography. His computer was a family computer that was in a place accessible to his entire family, and his entire family did frequently use that computer. When police showed up, they asked his wife for consent to search the contents of that computer, and his wife gave consent. The child pornography was found, but Smith took it all the way to the Supreme Court because he argued that because it was his data, his wife could not give consent to search it. And the court ruled that because it was a shared device, anybody who has access to that device, anybody who has kind of legal ability to use it, could give consent to search it. And because his wife frequently used that device, she could give consent to search it, and it doesn't matter that Mr. Smith wasn't home and thus couldn't give his consent. They only needed the consent of one adult who had access to that device. Another thing we have to talk about when it comes to not needing a warrant is plain view. Okay? And plain view basically states that whenever officers or other government agents are in a place they're legally allowed to be, doing a thing they're legally allowed to do, anything they see, whether it's related to why they're there doing what they're doing or not, doesn't require a warrant. So in other words, if police knock on my door and they say, hey, we're investigating a burglary next door. Can we come in and talk to you? And I say, yeah, sure. And I allow them into my home, and as soon as they come into my home, they look on a coffee table and see a big pile of cocaine. The fact that they were legally in my house, i.e. I invited them in, does not mean they needed a warrant to just glance down and see that giant pile of cocaine, and thus they didn't need a warrant. It doesn't count as a search, and I will be going to prison for that cocaine. When it comes to digital evidence, this is applicable as demonstrated in this case, U.S. v. Carey, from 1 year after U.S. v. Smith. And in Carey, police had seized a computer. They had a warrant to search it for evidence of some crime. I can't remember what the crime was. I think it's drug sales or something like that, right? So the detective doing the digital analysis starts looking through the computer for evidence of that drug sales, but stumbles upon, again, I think like Smith, it was child porn, and immediately says, oh, wow, this is also a really major crime. So search the rest of the digital device for child porn evidence as well as the cocaine evidence, right? So again, this went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, that counts as plain view. They had a warrant to search the computer for the criminal evidence of the drug sales. The fact that they were legally doing what they were allowed to do and then kind of stumbled upon that child porn does not change, does not mean that they have gone beyond the scope of their warrant. Now, it is recommended legally that if you are in a similar situation, you're doing an analysis for one crime and, oh, look, you found evidence of something completely different. The recommended action is to stop, apply for a new warrant for that new crime, and then go back to searching it. But the good news is, if you have a warrant to search it for one crime, that at least that first thing, but probably anything you find related to a completely different crime, will be legally allowed under this plain view doctrine. Okay. The third warrant exception that we're going to talk about here is the search incident to arrest. Okay. And basically, this warrant exception, the Supreme Court has carved out to say that when somebody is arrested, right, police have probable cause to arrest somebody for whatever crime, it doesn't matter. During the process of the arrest, they are allowed to search the person and anything in their immediate control without a warrant. And this is for lots of purposes. Obviously, for officer safety, they want to make sure the person doesn't have a weapon, want to make sure they don't have handcuff key to try to get out of their handcuffs after their arrest. Want to make sure they're not bringing contraband into the jails, etc., etc. So because of all these reasons and more, the Supreme Court says, look, if you arrest somebody, you have probable cause to arrest them. That also gives you the right to do a warrantless search of them and anything under their immediate control as part of that. No warrant needed. Prior to 2014, what that meant was police could search you and say, what they find on everybody these days would be a cell phone, right? But again, based on that search incident to arrest prior to 2014, police were using that exception to the warrant requirement to search and not just to find the cell phone, but then to look through the contents of that cell phone, i.e. looking at text messages, looking at saved pictures and videos, and so on and so forth. But in 2014, Riley v. California, this went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said no. The entire justification for this search incident to arrest thing is based on things like contraband and weapons and, the ability to get out of handcuffs and things like that, none of which is applicable to the contents of a cell phone. So when police arrest somebody, they can search the person and seize a cell phone, but if they want to look at the contents of that cell phone, they need a warrant. The search incident to arrest is not enough to justify the search of the contents of that cell phone. Now, to go back to the plain view for a moment, let's say police arrest somebody, search them, find a cell phone, but then after they've seized that cell phone, somebody texts the arrestee, and that text message pops up on the screen, and police just glance down and read that text message. That would not be a search based on that previously mentioned plain view doctrine. So if police then went in purposefully and, opened the phone and read other texts in that chain, that's no bueno. That would not be plain view. But if some message just pops up on the screen of the phone, that doesn't count as a search. That's just plain view. Okay? Now, border searches, essentially what the Supreme Court has ruled in a few different cases now is that if you are entering the country either at a physical border, i.e. with Mexico or Canada, via ship in a port, or via airplane in an airport, if you are coming into this country, you essentially have no Fourth Amendment rights. It doesn't matter whether you're a citizen or not. If you leave the country and then come back in or try to get in for the first time, you have no Fourth Amendment protections. Police, in these cases, it's usually Customs and Border Protection, but it could theoretically be any law enforcement officer. They have the right to search you, your luggage, your computers, anything they want, no warrant needed. So if you're, flying home from a trip to Europe and police say, hey, open your laptop, I want to see the contents of what's going on that laptop, you cannot say, oh, well, you need a warrant. I'm not consenting to the search. It doesn't matter. They have every right to search whatever you want, whatever they want, and they're allowed to even look at, say, the contents of a laptop if they want, no real warrant needed. One of the issues in digital data is third-party disclosure. And essentially what the Supreme Court ruled long before cybercrime was a thing is that if a person shares any sort of information with a third party, that third party can then share it with the police, and the police don't need a warrant to search the original person's anything, right? So in other words, if I give a recording of a phone call to some third person, that third person is free to go to the police and say, hey, here, check this out. Kevin gave me this recording, and police don't need a warrant to listen to that or view that, right? So when it comes to digital data, that is kind of tricky, right? I'm not aware of any. There might be a Supreme Court case on this, but I'm not aware of a Supreme Court case about, say, cloud storage, right? So right now I store a lot of data, not just on my home computer, but also using a cloud storage service. Is that cloud storage service now legally able to say, hey, police, check out these files that Kevin has stored on our cloud storage service? That is kind of legally, great question. Another issue when it comes to the Fourth Amendment and digital evidence is exigent circumstances. And exigent circumstances is just the fancy legal way to say emergency. If there's some emergency, police are allowed to do a search without needing a warrant. In other words, if police are standing outside an apartment door and they hear somebody inside the apartment screaming, help, help, he's going to kill me, oh my God, ah. They don't need to wait for a warrant to just burst into that apartment and save that person's life, right? That would be a good example of exigent circumstances. When it comes to digital evidence, there might theoretically also be a situation in which exigent circumstances arrive and the police need to look into somebody's cell phone or at some kind of digital device because there is some kind of emergency and time is of the essence and there's no time. Police do not have the ability to go gather a warrant. All right. We're going to go ahead and take a break. I hope you enjoyed that discussion of the Fourth Amendment. Thank you so much for watching.